unmuting yourself and introducing yourself, which congregation you're at, what your role is in the congregation, and I think what interested you into being part of this discussion. So I'm just going to go across my screen and I'll invite you to unmute and share that. So Norma, would you like to start?
All right. I am Norma Lehman, and I'm a member of the Incarnation Lutheran Church. And Mindy introduced me to this and the book, and we have a little group that's studying this. And in the congregation, I'm trying to help with the outreach and local mission. So I'll follow what Mindy tells me.
Great, thank you. And I'm sure Mindy appreciates that. Sally, how about you?
I'm Sally Jarris from St. John's Lutheran Church in Palm Desert. And I'm going to stop walking because I can't walk and talk. And the kids have always been an interest, the young people of mine. My kids are all grown up now, but I know since we began with churches that it's always been an issue to include the youth and young people. So it's just something I know is greatly important.
Thank you.
And I'm a lay person. I really don't have a position where I'm doing anything with youth or young people right now.
That's okay. That's okay. I'm sure you're doing more than you know. Molly, I invite you next.
Hi, everybody. I'm Molly Farron, and I am the Youth and Family Coordinator at St. John's in Palm Desert. And, you know, everything about this book interests me. I've been at St. John's for like 13 years in my position. And since day one, I was interested in kind of closing that generational gap and making us an intergenerational church. And, you know, so much of this, actually, when I read it, I was like, yeah. So I think a big gap for us is young adults. And so there's a nice focus on that. But just making us an intergenerational church.
Thanks. Daryl, how about you?
Sorry, I had to disappear there for a while, but the doorbell rang and it was a delivery. So
Something
sorry,
good?
I didn't catch all the introductions. So I'm Daryl Dottie. I'm with Incarnation Church, member of the council. And yeah, like Norma said, we have a group, including all of us on the council, who have been focusing on this book to try to figure out how we can, like everybody else seems to be interested in, attract and retain a younger constituent. So that's why we're here.
Thanks. Janine.
Hi, I'm Janine Morrow, and I'm the office administrator for St. Peter's by the Sea Lutheran in San Diego. And right now I'm the only one in our church that I'm aware of that's been reading or studying the book, but I'm finding it interesting, and I'm hoping as we settle in with our new pastor that this might be something we can get a team up working on.
Good. And something that we'll share as we get to the end of these conversations in June is that Mindy and I, as facilitators, can help you if you need that help in your congregation with those conversations, if you'd like to do some stuff with that. So we're here for that. So thank you. Pastor Jeff. Oh, you're on mute.
Hi, Pastor Jeff Lilly. I'm at Lutheran Church of Honolulu. I'm just always interested in ways that a church can be healthier and more engaged in mission. And this is one of those things that I'm looking at for that.
Good. Thank you. Emily.
There we go. Okay, I got it. I'm Emily, and I'm from Ascension Lutheran in LA Gardens, and I am co-chair of Outreach. And just like everybody else, I'm trying to figure out how to maintain our youth in our church and to encourage others to stay. Interestingly enough, we've had a few young adults stay, and we have no young adult activities, but the two most recent people who have joined, besides a family, were young adults. So they just liked us and decided they'd stay with the old fogies, I guess.
Thanks. Pastor Jen.
Hi, sorry I was a little bit late, but I think I got the drift. I'm Pastor Jen Shaw at St. John's Lutheran Church, and we're sort of sharing our hopes or goals or,
Why you found this, why you wanted to join this conversation.
Yeah, and I think in part, as many other people have said, to create that kind of community where young adults and youth and families feel welcome and embraced. And also, I think a little, in addition to that and beyond that, is I appreciate the focus on fostering young leaders and really getting people engaged to pass along the faith to the next generation and generations to come. So I appreciate that. Not just getting them in the doors, but having them stay and really be invested and grow in faith.
Thanks. And I know I'm going to mispronounce your name, but I'm going to give it a shot. Pulelehua. Oh, man.
That's perfect. It's just lovely. So I'm Pulelehua. I'm from Calvary by the Sea in Ainahaina, so neighbors there. And I've just been snorkeling in Hanawa Bay, so that's why I'm all wet. But look, I got here on time now. That's a miracle. That's a God thing. And I'm just somebody who has young people in my life. I like young people, but I can't figure out why when they come to Calvary, they love where it is. They love all of this, but it doesn't resonate for them, which I can kind of guess. And we have a new pastor, Pastor Moses Barrios, who's been here about 6 weeks now. And he recommended that the council all read this book. I'm not on the council, but I love to read. So there you go. And I love book groups. So that's why I'm retired librarian.
Well,
So.
Thank you. And I promise to get better with your name. I did this backwards from what Pastor Tom did, but I invite Mindy to introduce herself.
Thanks. I'm Deacon Mindy Bugay. I'm on staff at Incarnation Lutheran Church, and the main responsibility that I've had for 13 years there is youth ministry. And so this is something that's near and dear to my heart.
And I'm Terry Robertson. I serve in the office of the bishop for the Pacifica Synod in an entirely different role than young people. I do the accounting and communications, and I work as a volunteer with our Synod youth ministry leaders and our Synod youth team. So, this just really resonates with me because I have young adult children who struggle with the church, and if we can help any young adults stay connected to the church, I just think anytime we invest in that is good. So thank you all for being here and for sharing. Again, for those of you who joined late, Pastor Tom Golrich, our Director for Evangelical Mission, is not able to be with us tonight. He sends his greetings and blesses our time together from afar. So, I'll hand it over to Mindy to open us in prayer.
All right, let's all pray together, please. Merciful and loving God, we are so grateful for this lovely day as we gather together to learn new ways to be church in inclusive and caring relationships. Lord, we ask that you open our hearts and our minds to new ideas and meaningful conversations. All this we ask in the name of your Son, our Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.
And so as we do each time, we usually start with a brief overview of our last time together. And since I led the conversation on that time, I'm going to lead this quick recap. In March was our third session and our third core commitment, and that was entitled Taking Jesus' Message Seriously, chapter 4 of the book. Our conversation was not about changing theology, but rather to understand how young people are talking about and relating to Jesus' message. And they're hoping that their churches are too. We talked about 2 myths that are often attached to ministry with young people. One of them was that you need to water down your teaching in order to reach the younger generation. But our young people want to be challenged to grow in their faith. They want to talk about the hard things. Another myth is that you need a flashy, hyper entertaining program to attract young people. The good news is you don't. You just be who you are, be who your church is. The authenticity is more important than the big production. We heard the struggle that many young people and many not so young people have between using language referring to the work of Christianity, which often carries a lot of baggage, rather than the work of Jesus Christ. One quote from our time was, "It's not Christianity that brings the good news, it's Jesus." People care about the words we use, and sometimes we use theological words that confuse people rather than everyday language that people can relate to. So in their study, Fuller found that there were 3 shifts that churches that were growing young exemplified in how they were talking differently about Jesus' message. The first was they were talking less about abstract beliefs and more about the person and work of Jesus Christ. Guess what? Jesus is still compelling to our young people. We want to pay attention to how we might be undertelling the story, that Jesus' message best makes sense when it's understood as part of a larger story. The second shift was talk less about heaven later, more about life now. Young people specifically want to know what they're saved for, not what they're saved from. And it's important for all of us to know that the kingdom of God is not only available after we die, but the power and presence of the kingdom of God is at work in our lives, in our church, and in our world right now. The third and final shift was less dogmatic certainty and more authentic honesty. We shared a video and actual real life situation that relates to how young people have big questions like, does God know about these things that are happening in our world? And what is God doing about this? What is God thinking about this? And how we can't run from those questions. We need to offer on-ramps to discuss the tough topics, which will open up our churches to be natural communities and comfortable places for bringing these up and asking hard questions about life. And a final reminder was that evangelism isn't dead among young people. It just looks different than we might think. So that, in a nutshell, was what we discussed last time. If you missed it, the recordings of both of our sessions on the same topic is up on our Growing Young page on our Synod website. And now Mindy's going to introduce tonight's topic.
Yeah, so tonight we're talking about chapter 5, which is fueling a warm community. And I want to start off by just kind of opening up to a group discussion and inviting you to name things from your church experiences that made you feel welcomed at home or maybe part of the church family. And as you think about what those things may have been, were there specific people who fostered that warmth in your congregation for you? So I'll invite you to just unmute yourself and jump in with examples.
I can go. So the specific reason why I ended up at St. John's was because of the warmth that I felt. I came in, I had 4 young children in tow and 1 on the way. And I just always felt like, you know, they really cared about my kids and they really cared about my family. And that really did it for me. I had been at a mega church before that where I was involved, but it just didn't have that personal connection. And so, you know, that worked. We've been there ever since. and my kids grew up in the church, but I think as they got older, they always had a connection with specific people, specific older people, that they really appreciated. I mean, my daughter's graduation party, she skipped grad night and she had a party and she invited everybody from the church. And that was just the best thing to her. So that really did it for us. I don't know that all the kids that come along have those same connections. I hope that they do. And I've tried to foster that within our congregation. But yeah, that did it for us. So this book makes sense when I read it. Like, I get that.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else?
I had a similar experience. I wrote down, and it sounds like it was almost the same experience. I walked into church after having been church shopping, and I wasn't going to let I had a young 3-year-old and a nursing, like 5-month-old. And I walked into church and I sat down in the back and nobody looked funny at me. And I was nursing my youngest at the time, quietly, trying to be very inconspicuous. And somebody turned around, and ended up being a very good friend. Someone turned around and she said, "Welcome. We love children here." And the 3-year-old was being disruptive, as 3-year-olds tend to be. And I was trying to keep her quiet and do what I needed to do. And it just felt like it was home and it was okay. And the people really did love my kids, and my kids love they don't go to church now on their own, but when they come home, they want to go to church because everybody knows their name and everybody wants to see how they're doing and what they're up to. And it is just a wonderful, wonderful feeling. And it goes on from there. Many things that have, they've supported me through an awful lot. And it's home.
Cool. That's wonderful. Thank you. Anybody else?
Well, I'll share very, very similar to what Molly and Emily shared. For me, it was Ascension when I came back to Lutheran Church Ascension in Thousand Oaks. And honestly, there was a spirit in the place, and really, as soon as I walked through the doors, I kind of just sensed that sense of hospitality and welcome, and sort of just knew I was home. And it feels like a very, talk about first impressions, but all of this feels like you just kind of walk into a place and kind of get that feeling. And that was that case for me. And frankly, the same at St. John's, where I am now. I mean, when I was called there, it was the same kind of feeling. So, yeah.
Okay. All right. Awesome. Okay. Well, and continue to, to think about your stories, and some of the things that you're thinking about may be helpful to our discussion a little later in your groups. What I want to do right now is I'm going to share a video with you. It's just a few minutes long, and it's from Kara Powell, who's one of the authors of the book. And she talks a little bit about this core commitment and tells a story about someone very special.
Now let's move to the next core commitment. It's not just about how we lead. There's another factor involved. It's about how we build relationships. See, because you can download good preaching, but you can't download thoughtful mentoring. We can download good preaching, but young people can't download thoughtful mentoring. That's something that we can offer them in a unique and powerful way that they often can't get anywhere else, and certainly can't get online. Fascinatingly, when we spent time at churches that are growing young and spent time interviewing the young people at these churches, and we asked them, what do you love the most about your church? See, a lot of times we assume that young people are going to say, oh, I love my friends. Or I love how fun it is. Or we get people say, oh, young people love it when churches have free food. All of that is true. But you want to know actually the leading answer for young people at churches that are growing young, what they love about their church? They say that it's like family. What do they love about their church? As we're transitioning to the next core commitment, it's like family. It's like family. Here's what one young person told us during the course of the interview. This is life. It's not just church life. It's life. It's hard. It's busy, but we're in it together. We're like a family. So out of our research, not only did we say we need to hand over keys in our churches, but we also said we need to fuel a warm community. We need to fuel a warm community. This is so important as a core commitment. We can't lay off the gas pedal here. We need to go all in on warm community. And in fact, as we studied the words that young people use to describe their churches, we came up with what we call the warmth cluster. These are the actual adjectives, the actual attributes that young people use to describe their churches that were warm. These churches that are growing young, that aren't aging or shrinking, but are thriving with teenagers and young adults. This church was welcoming. This church was accepting, belonging, authentic, hospitable, caring. Hear these words from young people themselves. One of the churches growing young that we studied was in Pennsylvania. And we were going to go visit the church. And so before we visited the church, we did interviews with teenagers and young adults at the church. And we asked them, what do you love the most about your church? What draws you to your church? And teenagers and young adults kept talking about Bill, how much they loved Bill. Teenagers would talk about how Bill would show up at basketball games and be sitting in the stands and cheering them on, or showing up at the high school play, sitting in the pews and cheering them on. Young adults would talk about how Bill would come to where they worked and take them out to coffee. We kept hearing about Bill. So as a research team, we thought, boy, we can't wait to meet Bill. We get to this church in Pennsylvania. We meet Bill. It turns out Bill, at the time, was 72 years old. And as Bill told us, he remembers an adolescence where nobody was showing up in the stands for him. Adults weren't coming to cheer him on when he was in sports, when he was in the play. Nobody was taking him out as a 20-something for coffee. And so Bill has resolved that that is not going to be true for the young people at his church. And so he has made it his mission, his quest, to make sure that young people are surrounded by this warm community. And not just Bill, but he's recruiting other adults, especially senior adults, to be part of this team that's loving young people, that's finding out what's going on in the lives of the young people of their church and is showing up and is cheering them on. And as we spent time with Bill said, yeah, in fact, I've even written up a one-page summary of what I want adults to do. Show up in the lives of young people. And we said, oh, Bill, that's wonderful. Will you send that to us? And he said, yeah, I'd be happy to. So he sent it to us. This is the sheet of paper from Bill in Pennsylvania. And he faxed it to us from the local library. This is how Bill got this sheet of paper to us.
So as Kara continues her talk, that faxing of the page was important because it ties back into how we don't have to have be the most tech savvy people in the congregation or be flashy or any of those things. We just have to be be present, and build relationships. So I'm going to switch over now to some slides. And we're going to get into a little bit more of the chapter. Sorry. My mouse doesn't want to work. There we go. So again, we're talking about chapter 5, Fueling a Warm Community. And it's important to take away from this chapter that warm is the new cool, right? 1 in 3 young people, when describing their church, shared about its warmth. And the research points out that structure is still necessary for growing young. There still needs to be ministry groups and programs. There still is a need for youth group and small groups and trips, but those aren't what keeps a church thriving. It's the relationships that are built within those settings that are important. Those settings are what create space for people to be together and to nurture the relationships. And we can facilitate the get-togethers, but if people don't bond through the experiences, then they're just more activities. There's no draw or no interest for them to return. 45% of those who were 19 through 23-year-olds in the research identify personal relationships, not programs, as the reason why they remain involved in their church community. A sense of family is what is important to this group of young people. And if we look at the DNA, page 169 of your book, and it was a quote that Kara Powell used in the video I just showed you too, where youth ministry volunteers said, this is life. It's not just church life, it's life. It's hard, it's busy, but we're in it together. We're like a family. The DNA of a church family is its warmth, including its hospitality, its welcome, and its unconditional acceptance, all of which young people need to fill that need that we talked about in chapter 3 to belong and to have a purpose. In the chapter on pages, starting on page 178, there are ideas for action, and I want to go over a few of these with you. So the first one is to take your congregation's relational temperature. You know, it isn't just about being polite. In the book and in the video that we just watched, warmth is characterized as authentic, hospitable, caring, welcoming, accepting, and belonging. And you could ask younger people in your congregation or maybe in your community what their perception of the temperature of your congregation might be. Because sometimes we're missing it because we're just too close to it. And on the top of page 179, there's an extra text box in your book that says at the top, sometimes close communities become closed communities. When we're all inside as a group, we might be missing things that outsiders see or outsiders need. And so we have to be really mindful of how welcoming we are and how inclusive we really are. Then helping newcomers land smoothly and soon, we need to assess objectively with the help of others, young people or non-church members, etc., just what a first-time experience at our church is like. You know, are they greeted genuinely? Are they really welcomed? I love the example of the young children being welcomed and being, you know, parents being told that children are welcome here. You know, I mean, that is so just outwardly warm to new people. Are people just nice and don't go that extra that extra distance to really make people feel included? Is it easy for people to join Bible studies or other groups or events or service projects that maybe are announced during a worship service? Where do they go to get the information? You know, and who really wants them to be there? Who would be looking for them to come back? You know, sometimes, you know, that fear of missing out kind of thing that is on social media so much now. You know, how do we make church something that people fear missing out on? And then creating a 5-to-1 ratio for adults to young people. Some churches have confirmation mentors in place. You know, do those relationships continue after confirmation into high school and college age and beyond? A lot of our kids start out really young in church choir or in plays or productions at our churches. You know, who's mentoring them and who's making sure that they're staying connected somehow in the church community? Who are the bills in your congregation? We have a couple in Incarnation, and I know one person who would go to baseball games of some of our students and basketball and volleyball games of some of our students, and rarely talked about having done it, but then the kids would come and tell me that that person had shown up at their game and how much it meant to them, you know? And so those kinds of things, like who's the bill in your congregation? And if you don't have a bill, maybe you should be the one who, you know, starts a group that does those things. So let's see. The others were multi-generational worship, family room worship, tiny churches, on-ramps. On-ramps can be important in a number of ways too, because it's not always just newcomers, but as we talked about, you know, confirmation to high school to adult education, are our young people seeing those on-ramps to those other ministry areas that they can be included in? Or do they feel like, you know, that's not where they're supposed to go, and maybe they don't feel like they have a place to go after high school within the church? What about newly married or newly parented couples? You know, we need to acknowledge them and invite them to participate wherever they are in their life. And then supporting graduates, you know, having prayer pals from a distance, sending text messages to students while they're away at school, things like that. Warmth can be slow, and I know that slowness can be hard to deal with sometimes. But any changes may come up against, you know, that old saying, we've always done it this way, we've never done it that way. And so that type of criticism might come up, but now is a time to embrace doing things differently and better and more intentionally than we did before. I mean, look at all the things that our congregations have done differently than before within the past year out of sheer necessity. We have needed to change how we do things, and reaching and retaining young people is also a necessity. And so I think this is a prime time to advance some changes in our congregation. And so, yeah, warmth can be slow, and we might come up against, you know, some criticisms or some pushback from time to time. But as with any change in the church, change can come if we stick with it. Consider to like your current youth membership, the youngest of those would be coming up into new and exciting times in ministry, where they see the kids that are a little bit older than them being nurtured and included in ministry objectives, and then they'll know that that's open to them too in the future. And an entire congregation of faith can just be open to them and to their ideas and to their you know, their faith building process. They might be less likely to walk away from church, and they might be more likely to invite others into church. if they really enjoy it and feel welcomed and accepted as they are. So slow is okay, as long as there is movement forward towards a goal. And that's where I'm done, Terry.
Thank you, Mindy. Just such, it seems daunting, but such small steps that don't require a big budget. Something any of us can do. I know when we were looking to, a small church I was a member of for many years, we were looking to find someone to work with our youth. The question that our youth were asked was, who says hello to you on Sunday mornings? Who in this congregation greets you? Most of them could name one or two people, and that was it. Just learning names is huge, being able to do that work. So what we're going to do now is we're going to divide you up into breakout rooms of 3 or 4. I have some questions that I am putting in the chat right now. Look at that. And there's 2 of them, and this is just to kind of guide your discussion. You may want to discuss some other things, and feel free to do that. But the first one is, to what extent does your church feel like family? And on a scale of icy, cool, room temperature, or fireside warm, what rating would you give your community? And why would you give it that rating? And then the second question is, what are some of the obstacles to warmth, which we've defined here as authenticity, hospitality, caring, welcoming, accepting, and belonging in our congregations. So you may think of your particular congregations, but you may also think of a congregation that in the past that you've been with or visited, or what made it feel warm or not so warm. I'm sure we all have examples of that. You're going to have 15 minutes. I will give you a 5-minute warning, and then the 1-minute warning that your room's going to close. So I invite you to enjoy your time together, and I'm going to open up all the rooms.
We have 3 groups, Terry, or 4? 3? Okay, so so if at least one of you from each group want to give a little feedback, share about what you all talked about in your group, what stood out in your conversations, and just kind of give everybody some insights. Group 1.
I'm not sure that we know. Do we know how we're numbered?
Group 1 was Daryl, Pastor Jen, and Pulehua. Oh man, I'm so sorry.
I'll go. I learned how to say Pulehua. She said I got it right. So I'm
Pulehua. That's pretty.
Pulehua. So yeah, we had a nice chat. I mean, I guess the way I'd say, we all thought we were somewhere in the warm to warm, coolish, perhaps. Probably more warm over in the islands, because they greet everybody with leis and they take their picture on the ocean, and so they have like a culture, it seems to me, like that of welcome and acceptance. And I kind of shared with, and you've heard me say, Mindy, about how we're a warm community in Incarnation once you get in the community, but cracking that shell is really difficult, and people have come and gone from our congregation. We didn't even know they passed through sometimes, because people are so absorbed in looking at their friends and everything like that, we miss the opportunities to be intentionally welcoming. So I shared that, and I think that, well, Jennifer, I don't know if you wanted to chime in or not, but I mean, I got the impression that there was a little of that happening out in the desert too. So we
Yeah,
got some
yeah.
things to work on.
Yeah, and this, and then that being an obstacle, and maybe also the obstacle of language, just using a lot of insider language that makes a lot of sense to us, but maybe doesn't make sense to someone who's unchurched, and yeah, kind of that insider outsider thing in a lot of ways. Very friendly for folks who are there, and I legitimately think our church is pretty welcoming, but we also do have those folks who don't like loud, disruptive kids in the service, and just want to focus on their worship experience. And so, it's a little challenging too sometimes. For all those people who are lovely and welcoming, there's other folks who maybe not so much so. So. Mhm.
Okay. One of the other groups? Just unmute yourself and jump in.
I think all three of us felt like our congregations are pretty warm. But we also talked about how it's really difficult to tell from the inside. So for me, I kind of took my cue from the people who leave. This is the first church that I've ever been a part of that when people leave, they actually weep. That's the first time I've ever experienced that. And then the other two also said, pretty friendly, but also sometimes so friendly that you scare the heck out of people. And then the other thing I shared is I'm not really big on I kick back a little bit about the language of church being family, because a lot of my folks don't want their church to be like their family at all. They don't come from good families, they come from difficult families. So I tend to use the word community or some other word rather than family, because there's just so many damaged people that it just works better for me, but that may not be true for others.
No, that's a good point. That's a really good point. Sure. Anybody else want to share?
I guess I can speak for our group. I think we all, believe that our churches are fireside warm, and then maybe tend to go back to room temperature depending on what's going on. Like an example was given about, but then once we go to Fellowship Hall, yes, everyone's invited, but we tend to go into our little cliques and that sort of thing. But, in our discussion, we also talked about, a little bit of the difficulty of connecting, maybe someone from an older generation and a young person, how did that make that connection? What do they have in common? That sort of thing. Ooh, sorry. And, but we also talked about maybe little things we could do. People talked about, well, I could write a letter, I could send a card. Those type of things, and make that personal connection. So it just feeling okay and comfortable with doing that. Somebody said they're worried about being the creepy lady, and just go for it. Not being creepy, but sending the letter.
Okay.
I'll share something, two things actually. About 5 years ago, I was a youth minister in a congregation, and I left that position to come back to the synod full time. And I had to find a new church home because I couldn't worship at the church that I was the youth minister at. And so kind of a daunting thing, but I thought, oh, visit a number of different churches. And I found very quickly that one, the sharing of the peace is the most awkward time for a guest, especially in a church that has a lot of connections. And sharing of the peace is this conversation time. So you greet the people around you, but everybody else is having conversations and you're standing there going, I don't know anybody to talk to. But I did the church that I'm now a member of. I remember thinking like all these people are so close. They have a very warm, tight community. but I didn't know how to break into that. So when it says have on-ramps to that, I think there is that, and that's where I did make my connection in it, with somebody invited me finally to something that I could have that on-ramp to be a part of. The second thing is just a fun thing is when I was a volunteer youth leader, I did a bunco night for the youth. And it was looking like, you know, bunco, you need a certain number of people and a certain number of groups, and you really need a good amount of people to do this. And so I was worried that I wasn't going to have enough. So I invited the whole congregation, and the people that came to that were a lot of the senior members in our congregation. And it turned out to be the best way to safely and easily, without a lot of threats, mix people around and get people to introduce themselves to one another. And then once they started, they were randomly mixed up, and they couldn't stay with their friends the whole time. Each round, if you've ever played bunco, moves you around. And I threw in a little thing. You had to introduce yourself to your new partner each round and tell them one thing about them. And it mixed up our seniors with our youth. And I found in the Sundays after, people were greeting each other by name, and it was totally unintentional that this was this great mixer that they all loved, and it got people to know one another. So if you like to play bunco when we can all get together again safely, it's a great mixer and a great way to mix up the generations. So
That sounds fun. Cool. Okay, thank you all. And then one of the other ideas that it talks about in the book is having your worship services feel more like family room gatherings. And I know for our congregation, just before the pandemic shut us down, we were in Lent of 2020, and we had moved all the chairs in our sanctuary into circles so that as people shared and talked during the discussion time and during worship, you know, we were looking at one another. And so that was one option where it looked more like a family room, not so much like a church. Now, if you have pews, that's not always easy, but where could you possibly change that atmosphere in your worship service so that it's more of a family room type gathering? It's something to keep in mind. So I invite you all to, you know, to really think about all of those action items in this chapters. Additionally, you know, in all of the chapters, really look at those action items and see which ones you think would be most effective in your setting and doable in your setting, and you know, figure out how to move forward with that possibly in the future. And I'll turn it over to Terry.
Well, just thanks again for being with us tonight. Thanks for the conversation and participating. Our next session will be in May, and that is chapter 6 of the book. This will be our 5th of 5 core conversations. And again, once we finish with these, we invite you, if you would like us to help you in your congregation facilitate conversations, we're here for that. If you have people in your congregation who can't be here for these, they're always recorded, and except for the breakout sessions, of course. But our next core commitment will be prioritize young people everywhere. So excited about that. We do still have some ebook codes for people who might need the Kindle version or be able to utilize the Kindle version of this. I think that's it. I thank Mindy for her presentation tonight, and I would like to invite someone to close us in prayer. And it does not have to be a pastor. Anyone?
I'll do it.
Thank you.
Okay, Epule Kako, let's all pray together. So let's feel and sink into this moment where we are all together here in this moment, in this place. Thank you for embracing the joy and the delight that we have. Thank you for these warm hearts, which are embracing all of us, young, of all ages. And just thank you for the leadership that's led, and for knowing that as we open our hearts, welcoming the divine indwelling, consenting to God's presence and action in our life, that we are there with all peoples. In Jesus' name, yay, God.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pule Luhua. Closer. I promise. I will try. Thank you all. Have a good evening. Hope to see you next month.
Thank you, Terry.